there, it's Natasha and thank you so much for joining me today. Today I got in these Elizabeth Craft Designs 2 sets here, sort of camping, hiking sort of sets, and you can see here the first one has the fishing reel and a fish, a guitar, it's got a little flame and some wood, and then the second one is mainly to create the tent itself as well as a little lantern. So just to save some time, I have gone ahead and cut these all out of plain white cardstock. I'm going to be using some finger daubers to colour all of these along with my Distress Oxide inks. Now you could definitely cut these out of patterned paper or paper that you had made yourself, but this is just what I chose today to kind of create the colours that I wanted to go with each other. So I'm going to start off here with some peeled paint, and I want a really thin, not blotchy, but certainly not really good coverage layer of it on my tent. So I'm just going over it really lightly. You can see that I made sure I got rid of some of the ink on the side there. Then I'm picking up some Hickory Smoke, which is just a grey colour, and I am just daubing the finger dauber up and down. And that creates a really nice texture from the sponge itself. Then once I've got most of the ink off, I'm going to actually go around and kind of blend it in just a little bit. But I really like the texture for the tent there, and I'm just going to pop around the edges and kind of darken them up a little bit just for a little bit of definition. So when you die cut out this tent, it has the kind of flaps there at the front which are scored already. So I'm just going to bend those back, and I want them to be a slightly darker colour. So I'm just putting a little bit of scrap paper there. And I'm using a little bit of, I think this is kind of a Lucky Clover colour with a little bit of the Hickory Smoke on top, so the grey colour on top, just to tone it down a little bit. Now, as always with these sets that you buy, they come with lots of little pieces and things, and you don't necessarily have to use all of the pieces that come with it. So I'm using some today, and I'm going to leave some out. I am going to colour these little supports here, or guide ropes, or whatever they're meant to be, a brown colour using some vintage photo, and then using that Hickory Smoke colour, I am colouring this little triangle, and this goes behind the tent, so it's kind of like you're seeing the inside of the tent when the front doors are open. So I'm making that quite nice and dark because it's looking to the inside. Then using the same vintage photo, I think it's the only brown that I use for this project, I have coloured the pieces of wood. I've also gone over and used the same colour on the little stick there, and I'm also using the same colour to colour in the little sausage. And even though I use the same colour for all 3 of those, if you use a little bit lighter hand on some of them, you can get a pretty good variation of colour. Now I'm going to move on to the little lantern, which I decided to include because it's pretty cute. So I have just zoomed right in here, and I am putting on some black soot ink on top of this using the sponge dauber. So I've already got the Hickory Smoke down, which is the grey, and if you just dab up and down, it creates some really nice texture, just so it's not quite so flat. Then I'm going to move on to doing the flames for the little fire there. So I'm just using some yellow, I think this is the mustard seed, and then the spiced marmalade, which is just an orangey colour, and then I'm going to add a tiny little bit of candied apple, which is the red, down to the very bottom of one of those little flames. So again, when I'm using my finger daubers, I often don't even re-ink them when I'm using them. If they've just got a little bit of ink left on there when I keep them in the storage case, that can often be enough that I don't need to get out the whole ink pad. But I don't actually have a finger dauber there ready for each ink pad. I just go roughly by the colours that I can see when I'm looking into the storage case. So you can see here I have just done the little backpack or pack, and I'm just adding on a couple of little details with a fine black pen, and a little bit on the sausage, a little bit on the wood, and a little bit onto the pack. So I have my 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card here, and I'm going to be laying it landscape today instead of portrait like I usually do. I have this cloud cut out here, which I've cut out from the Alina Cuddle dies, and I have just cut this out of some really nice thick card, and I use it over and over again. I'm using the light blue one here, which I think is maybe had the Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide. Again, I didn't even really re-ink it up. I was just using what ink was left on the inker until I decided I needed a little bit more. So it is really light to you guys, and I know it's kind of hard to see, but in real life it felt like a good amount to create a little bit of a sky or a background. You could also just stick on some cloud die cuts if that's what you have onto a light blue background. There's lots of different ways that you could go about it. And then just really quickly I am recreating some dirt or some ground or something there to just fill that bottom space. Again, this is quite a busy card in the end, creating a scene card, so seeing all of this background here, it won't quite be as clear once everything is on top of it. Now I have this stamp set here because I just wanted something to go in the background a little bit, and this one here is actually a fence post, but I'm going to use it as the trunk to the tree there. So I'm using some VersaFine Clair Pinecone color, which is just a nice brown pigment ink, but I could definitely have just used the vintage photo, which I used to create the ground and lots of the items that will go on the card as well. But I am just using first and second generation stamping to create some tree trunks there that I will stamp to go with the tree tops. Now again, I'm not worried too much about the background here because, as I said, a lot of it will end up being covered up. You could also just leave the background completely empty as well because there's plenty going on in the foreground. However, I just wanted to create a little bit of background, but this is completely optional and not something that you need to do at all. So you can see I'm not really worried here if I'm getting a perfect stamp. I'm not putting a lot of effort into making sure it's perfect because A, you won't see much of it, and B, I'm going to go over this with two different colors just so it's not so flat. So I did the dark green first and then moved on to the light green. Now it's time to put the whole card together, and I guess the tent itself could end up taking up the whole card front, and because I didn't want it to do that, I am going to have a little bit hanging off the edge and I'll end up cutting that off. But as I said, you kind of get the picture here, and you could make the tent the absolute focal point of this. However, because I wanted to include some more things, I'm just going to have it hanging off the edge just a little bit. So I put that background piece there first and then the tent on top. I have the couple of brown supports that go either side of the tent. Now I'm going to keep all of this relatively flat for the minute, so I'm just using the multi-medium and the matte finish. That's by Ranger. That's the glue that is inside the little bottle that I'm using. And then I'm going to pop a couple of logs down there to create myself the little fire. Again, just using the liquid glue to keep them nice and flat for the minute, and I'll add some dimensions soon. I'm going to pop the flame down, and this kind of makes me laugh, and it's a little bit painful because you would obviously never have the fire this close to the tent. However, I'm going to pretend that it's all perspective and that the tent is actually a long way behind the fire. So I have popped the sausage up on a little piece of foam tape, and I also put the second part of the flame on a little piece of foam tape. I'm adding the middle part of the lantern there, and then I'm going to pop a couple of pieces of foam so that will pop up as well. And even though it looks like there's a couple of pieces to kind of piece together here, it's not hard at all. Everything is very kind of intuitive as to where it should go, and there's also pictures on the front of the packaging which I really like, and that makes it nice and easy to know where everything belongs. So I'm going to pop up the pockets of the pack, or the flap at the top, and put that up on some foam as well. As I said, some of these little bits are going to be dimensional rather than the actual tent itself. I'm popping the lantern up the top, and then I've got foam squares behind each of these flaps, mainly so that they stay in place and don't get caught on anything. I'm going to pop the little pack up there, and I'm just going to put it with some glue because that left hand flap of the tent is already popped up on some foam. And then the last couple of finishing details here, I'm adding some of the Stardust Jelly Roll pen to the front, and then I'm going to add a little bit to the rest of the flames. And again, these are just finishing touches that you don't have to add at all. Sometimes I find it a little bit hard to stop, but I feel like it does give the fire a lot more kind of interest having it sparkle. And then I'm also going to add a little bit of glossy accents to what would be the glass part of the lantern, and when I am showing you this, it will look kind of cloudy, but it does dry nice and clear. And that's pretty much my card for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed creating this little scene with me. Let me know what you think down in the comment section down below, and I will link as many of these items as I can in the description box, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks, bye!